over 2.2 billion people believe Jesus of Nazareth was God in human form, that he did miracles, and that he lived after his death. But is that just blind faith? Outside the Bible, is there evidence that he existed at all? Is the Jesus of history anything like the Jesus of the Christian Gospels? We'll travel around the Roman Empire to look for mentions of Jesus in non-Christian sources and ask the question, is Jesus history? Our search for Jesus begins in Cambridge. Dr. David Instone Brewer is an historian who has studied ancient Jewish sources for evidence of Jesus.
What I've got here is a copy of the oldest manuscript Talmud. It's an account of the trial and crucifixion of Jesus, which is historical in the Talmud. It says, on the eve of Passover, they hung Jesus of Nazareth. It says, Yeshu Natzarein, Jesus of Nazareth. And they hung him for sorcery and for enticing Israel. So we got the date, the eve of Passover. We've got how he was executed. He was hung on a cross. We got his name, where he's from Nazareth. It's for sorcery. That's doing magic by means of the devil. And for enticing Israel, that's getting them to follow another religion, which Jesus did, of course. So they're proper charges, it's a proper date. We can imagine this coming from the day book of the court. That is, every day they recorded what decisions have been made, what judgments have been given, what executions have been given. And in the end of the year, you got the collection of the day book. And we can imagine this being part of it.
The mention of Jesus in the Talmud affirms several key details that match the Christian Gospels. But what do historians from the Roman Empire say about Jesus? There's a clue in history by a pagan Greek named Thallus around AD 55. Thallus describes a darkness as Jesus of Nazareth is crucified. The Gospels also describe this darkness, but Thallus says it's an eclipse of the sun. Thallus records one striking detail of the Jesus story in common with the Gospels. He offers a miracle-free, naturalistic explanation of that, but in doing so, records the crucifixion of Jesus within about 25 years of the event. To discover another first-century reference to Jesus, we must travel to what was once a small province in the north of the Roman Empire. In a 1400-year-old book in the British Library is another source. It is a letter written around AD 73 by a man named Mara, son of Serapion. Mara mentions 3 different wise men and the troubles that came upon the cities that killed them. Socrates in Athens, Pythagoras in Samos, and a wise king in Jerusalem.
All we have is a letter from him to his son, but it's probably his son which we learn more about what this letter is saying. This letter is saying, hey, don't spend your life trying to get rich. There's only so much you can do with riches. Get wise. And I can imagine the son saying, yeah, Dad, but these wise guys in history, they got killed. Pythagoras, he got killed, and Socrates, he got killed, because his dad then comes back and says, yes, but the cities that killed Pythagoras and Socrates, they were punished for it. And also, this is the interesting bit now, there's a wise king in Judea, and the city of the Judeans got destroyed. Jerusalem got destroyed. Now, he's writing just after 70 AD, so the destruction of Jerusalem has just happened. And it seems to be common parlance that there was a wise king there who was killed by the Jews. He's not a Jew, he's not a Christian, but everyone seems to know about this wise king.
Traveling to modern-day Turkey, we encounter a province that was once a thriving part of the Roman Empire. Here in the province of Bithynia, a Roman governor named Plini wrote about his experience interrogating Christians.
Pliny the Younger was governor of northwest Turkey between the year about 111 and 113, and he wrote about how he was rounding up Christians and interrogating them and telling them that unless they worshipped the emperor and so on, that they would be executed.
They regularly assembled on a certain day before daybreak. They recited a hymn antiphonally to Christus, as if to a god.
The really interesting thing there is that they seem to be worshipping Christ. So put together the logic that Christians aren't prepared to worship any other god, they're not prepared to worship the Roman gods, and here they are worshipping Christ. That can only happen if they have actually thought that Christ is the real God, the God of the Jews. And so I think what Pliny shows is that this idea that Jesus is God is not something that developed hundreds of years later when Christianity took grip of the Roman Empire in the 4th century and Constantine converted to Christianity. It's actually something that's there really early on.
One of Rome's finest historians refers to Jesus in several places of his ancient works. Tacitus was the governor of the Roman province of Asia, based in Ephesus, one of the most magnificent cities of the ancient world. When a fire broke out in Rome and many looked to Emperor Nero, a new religious group was blamed, the Christians. Nero substituted as culprits and punished in the utmost refinements of cruelty a class of men loathed for their vices, whom the crowd styled Christians.
He wrote about the Great Fire in Rome around the year 64, so he's about age 8, and yet he was in the city at the time, and he wrote about how the Christians were rounded up and persecuted, having a really hard time. And he wrote about how Christianity had all begun because this guy Christus had started it, and he says Christus was in Judea. He was put to death at the time under Pontius Pilate. Well, we know Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea from the year 26 through to the year 36. So that gives us a time for when Christianity began. And he also shows how Christianity has spread from Judea all the way to Rome in that time, and there are, by his time, a large number of Christians.
Christus, the founder of the name, had undergone the death penalty in the reign of Tiberius by sentence of the procurator, Pontius Pilate. Elsewhere, Tacitus calls Christianity a disease and a pernicious superstition. He was a hostile witness. And yet, Tacitus confirms key historical details that match the Gospel accounts. It's in a library in northern Italy that we discover another valuable historical source. Written by the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, is the earliest complete manuscript of the Antiquities of the Jews. Josephus mentions a high priest named Annas, and he says he was bold in his temper and very insolent, and that he organized the killing of the brother of Jesus, a man named James.
In that passage, he tells us that Jesus had a brother called James, which is, of course, exactly what we also know from the New Testament, and that this person, James, was executed by a mob for his religious views, and that really fits very well with the Christian documents that suggest that this James was a leader of the early Christian movement.
Josephus also has a controversial quote where he talks about what Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, did to Jesus.
Well, the other passage is a passage where he talks about Jesus as having been the Son of God, And there's been so much ink spilt on it because at one level it seems that a Jew shouldn't be saying or acknowledging that Jesus is the Son of God, so that seems like he's saying too much. And some people have tried to make grammatical arguments saying that some of these words have been added. The debates go back and forth.
About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man. For he was one who wrought surprising feats and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Christ. When Pilate, upon hearing him accused by men of the highest standing among us, had condemned him to be crucified, those who had in the first place come to love him did not give up their affection for him.
When you've got the Roman sources and the Greek sources and the Jewish sources and the Gospels, the Christian sources, all talking about the same thing, giving the same basic facts, then they're corroborating each other and you've got gold dust. You know those facts are likely to be correct because everyone's saying it from different places and agreeing with each other.
Traveling across the Roman Empire, we've seen a number of non-Christian historians reporting on Jesus. We've seen that the pages of history confirm that Jesus did exist 2,000 years ago, that he performed miracles and gained an eager following. Many of these writers were hostile to Christianity, and yet they offer independent evidence to back up key details from the Gospel stories. So if Jesus actually existed, then could his words and actions have meaning for us today? What do you think?